The night everything changed. I was alone in my father's study, surrounded by the ghosts of his silence. He'd been dead 3 months, and I'd avoided this room like a wound I wasn't ready to touch. But grief has a way of turning cowardice into curiosity, and that night I finally opened the footlocker he'd kept locked for 40 years. Inside, beneath his naval medals and faded photographs, I found it. A letter sealed with black wax, stamped with a symbol I'd never seen before. A compass rose wrapped in thorns. No name, just a date scratched into the envelope's face. March 4th, 1947. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. The letter began like a routine mission log. Coordinates, weather patterns, equipment checks, standard naval procedure. But by the 3rd paragraph, my father's handwriting changed. The letters became jagged, pressed so hard into the paper they'd torn through in places. He wrote about Operation High Jump, Admiral Byrd's Antarctic expedition that the history books barely mention. 13 ships, 4,000 men. The largest polar expedition ever mounted, supposedly to study weather and train for cold combat. But that wasn't why they went. Beyond Queen Maud Land, my father wrote, where the ice becomes unnaturally still and even the wind forgets to move, we found something that shouldn't exist. A wall of light on the horizon that bent the sky itself, shimmering like a heat mirage in a place where heat has no right to be. They sent planes to investigate. 3 aircraft. All vanished from radar within minutes, swallowed by something that looked like empty air. I read those words 5 times, trying to make them make sense. My father was a rational man, a Navy officer who'd survived the Pacific Theater. He didn't believe in ghost stories or conspiracy theories, yet here, in his own hand, was something that sounded like madness. But it was the ending that froze my blood. The ice beneath our feet hummed on certain days, low and constant, like the engine of a massive ship still too far away to see. And sometimes, in the dead of polar night, we heard voices in that hum, voices that knew our names. If this letter finds you, tell no one what I've seen. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. I sat in that study until dawn broke, staring at those words. Tell no one. But how could I not? This wasn't just my father's secret anymore. It was mine. And secrets like this, they don't stay buried. They dig their way out, one sleepless night at a time. I started researching obsessively. The official records of Operation High Jump were sanitized, clinical, empty of anything meaningful. But in the margins, I found cracks. A declassified memo mentioning unexpected magnetic anomalies and mission compromise due to loss of air reconnaissance assets. Assets, not pilots, not men. Assets. Then I found the newspaper article, a Chilean paper, El Mercurio, dated February 1947. The headline quoted Admiral Byrd directly. The present expedition has discovered a land of everlasting mystery and some objects that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. He never repeated that statement, and when he returned to the United States, he retired immediately. No book deals, no lecture tours, just silence. I tracked down 3 surviving members of my father's crew. 2 hung up the moment I mentioned his name. The third, a man named William Marsh, agreed to meet me in a diner off Interstate 70. He was 89, his hand spotted with age, but his eyes were sharp when I showed him my father's letter. "Your father was a good man," he said quietly. One of the few who understood what we were really doing out there. He glanced around the empty diner, then leaned forward. "We didn't go to Antarctica to map ice. We went because someone detected something. A signal. Electromagnetic pulses coming from beneath the ice shelf, in a pattern that couldn't be natural. Command thought it was a Nazi base. By the time we realized what it actually was, it was too late." "What was it?" I asked. William's jaw tightened. Something old. Older than human history. Maybe older than humans. He stood abruptly, throwing cash on the table. Your father spent 40 years trying to forget. Don't make his sacrifice meaningless. He walked out, leaving me with more questions than answers. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, my father's letter clutched in my hand, and for the first time in my life, I understood what real fear felt like. The story had just begun. 3 days after meeting William Marsh, a package arrived. No return address, no postage stamp. Just left on my doorstep while I was at work, like someone knew my schedule. Inside, a reel-to-reel tape recorder, 2 unmarked reels, and a note in handwriting I didn't recognize. But the words were familiar, taken directly from my father's letter, "Tell no one what you hear." My hands shook as I threaded the first reel. Static erupted from the speakers, harsh and uneven, like wind scraping across a microphone. Then, beneath it, a voice. Male. Distorted. Speaking words I couldn't quite make out. The audio quality was terrible, buried under layers of interference, but there was something deliberate about it. This wasn't random noise. This was a recording someone had tried very hard to preserve. At the 7-minute mark, the tape screeched. A sound like metal tearing, and then, clear as day, a whisper. My name. My full name. Spoken by a voice I didn't recognize. I yanked the power cord from the wall. The recorder kept spinning for 5 full seconds, clicking mechanically even though it had no power. When it finally stopped, the silence in my apartment felt oppressive, like the air itself was holding its breath. I didn't sleep that night. Every shadow seemed wrong, angles too sharp, darkness too thick. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was psychological. Stress, grief, the power of suggestion. But I didn't throw the tapes away. I locked them in a safe and tried to forget about them. I lasted 4 days. I took the reels to Marcus Webb, an audio engineer I'd worked with years ago on a documentary project. He owed me a favor, and more importantly, he knew how to keep his mouth shut. When I handed him the tapes, he raised an eyebrow at the age of the equipment. "Where did you get reel-to-reel stock this old?" he asked. "Estate sale." I lied. "Can you clean it up? Pull anything useful from the signal?" Marcus agreed. Said it would take a few days. That night, my phone rang at 2:47 a.m. His voice was shaking. "You need to come here now. Don't tell anyone where you're going." I found him in his studio, looking like he hadn't slept. Coffee cups everywhere. His hands trembled as he loaded the digitized file. "I ran it through every filter I have," he said. "Isolated the frequencies, stripped the noise layers. There's something embedded in this recording. Something that shouldn't be possible." He played it. Through the cleaned-up audio, a voice emerged, clear, calm, terrifying. Coordinates breached. Magnetic vector inversion confirmed. We crossed the threshold. He saw us. Pause, static, then, "God help us, he saw us." "That's not the worst part," Marcus said, pulling up a spectrogram. The audio waveform filled his screen, but instead of the chaotic patterns you'd expect from old tape, there was structure. Perfect, repeating geometric patterns. Lattices, almost like circuit boards or ancient glyphs. "This isn't language," Marcus whispered. "It's not random noise either. It's code, or instructions. The pattern loops, but not in time. It's like the signal is trying to fold space." That's when his equipment failed. Every piece of electronics in the studio surged simultaneously. Sparks shot from wall outlets. His backup drives fried. The lights died. In the sudden darkness, his computer screen flickered with text I hadn't written. "Return." Marcus refused to keep the tapes after that. Said he didn't want them anywhere near his home or his family. But before I left, he handed me a flash drive. "I made a backup," he said. against my better judgment. But there's something else. I ran a frequency analysis on that whisper, the one that says your name. It's not coming from the recording. It's generated by the recording. Like the tape itself is producing new audio. That's not possible. But it's happening. That night, I received an email. No subject line, no sender information, just coordinates, 70, 21 50 degrees, 100, 50 50 degree W. I cross-referenced them with every map I could find. Marie Byrd Land, Antarctica. One of the most remote, unexplored regions on Earth. And when I overlaid the coordinates onto the sketch I'd found in my father's belongings, they aligned perfectly with the area he'd labeled Event Zone. I knew what I had to do. It was insane. It was dangerous. It might cost me everything. But my father had left these breadcrumbs for a reason. Not to keep me away, but to lead me forward. Whatever he'd discovered in 1947, whatever secrets Operation High Jump had buried beneath 70 years of ice and lies, I was going to find them. I booked a flight to Santiago the next morning. Getting to Antarctica wasn't easy. From Santiago, I took a series of increasingly remote flights, each leg more expensive and less legitimate than the last. Nobody asks questions in the extreme tourism business if you pay cash and sign the right waivers. Eventually, I reached a Russian research outpost operating in legal grey areas, staffed by men who didn't care why you wanted to visit the most inhospitable place on Earth. Magnetic interference is bad in that region. The helicopter pilot warned me in broken English. His name was Dmitri, and he'd flown Antarctic routes for 15 years. Compasses go crazy, GPS fails, radio cuts out. You sure you want to go there? I told him I was writing a book about Cold War exploration. He didn't believe me, but he took my money anyway. We flew out at dawn. The landscape below was alien, endless white, broken by jagged mountain ranges that looked like the bones of some massive creature buried beneath the ice. The farther we went, the stranger things became. The compass spun uselessly. The GPS screen flickered and died. Even the altimeter started giving impossible readings. This is not normal interference, Dmitri muttered, tapping instruments that refused to respond. In 15 years, I never see it this bad. We landed near a ridge of ice that looked different from the surrounding terrain. Smooth, almost glassy, unnaturally uniform. The moment I stepped out of the helicopter, I knew something was wrong. The silence was absolute. No wind, no creaking ice, nothing. Just dead, oppressive quiet that made my ears ring. 1 hour, Dmitri called out. Any longer, I leave without you. I didn't blame him. This place felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate, like standing at the edge of something vast and hungry. I walked 100 yards and found the first piece of evidence, a rusted metal stake driven deep into the ice, wrapped with frayed cable that led to the remains of a weather balloon gondola. Half submerged, decades old. On the instrument panel, 3 letters were still visible. USN. United States Navy. My father's expedition. Another 100 yards and the ground changed. I almost didn't notice until I tripped. The texture beneath my boots wasn't snow. It was too smooth, too regular. I brushed away the ice and uncovered metal. A panel fused into the glacier itself, covered in symbols that weren't letters and weren't runes. Something between the two. They spiraled inward in perfect geometric patterns. The moment I focused on them, my vision blurred. The air grew thick, like trying to breathe underwater, and the ice beneath my hands began to hum. Low, constant, exactly as my father had described. I stood up, suddenly dizzy, and turned back toward the helicopter. It wasn't there. I spun in place, scanning the horizon. Nothing. Just empty white in every direction. My footprints were gone. The helicopter was gone. I checked my GPS beacon. Blank screen. My satellite phone. Dead. That's when I heard it. Faint at first, a resonance coming from beneath the ice, rhythmic and deliberate. Not seismic. Not natural. A pattern. I dropped to one knee, pressed my hand against the ground. The vibration pulsed through my glove, through my bones, into my chest. It felt like being next to a massive engine buried miles below. My radio crackled to life even though it had been dead for an hour. A voice came through. My voice. Playing back something I'd said days ago at Marcus's studio. You need to hear this. Looping, over and over. Then another voice joined in. Not mine. Lower, wet. Speaking through what sounded like water or static or both. Return. I ran. Pure panic. No direction, just movement. The ice seemed to shift beneath me. Textures changing. Distances warping. One moment I was sprinting across flat terrain. The next I crashed into the helicopter's landing skids. Dmitri was already powering up, eyes wide with something beyond fear. You said 1 hour! He shouted over the rotor noise. That was 4. What? No, Get in. Now. We leave now. As we lifted off, I looked back at the ridge. Just before the clouds swallowed it, I saw something beneath the ice. A shape. Massive. Moving slowly, deliberately, like something turning in its sleep. And for just a moment, I could have sworn it was watching us leave. Back at the outpost, I discovered the second tape had warped. The metal casing was melted, fused like it had been microwaved. But I hadn't touched it. It had been in my bag the entire time. That night, Marcus sent his final email. Subject line, "They heard it too." The message was brief. The signal isn't just noise, it's triangulation, like sonar. It was never meant for us. It was meant for something else. Something that's been listening. I tried calling Marcus the next morning. No answer. I tried again at noon, then at 5, then at midnight. Nothing. Finally, I drove to his studio. The door was unlocked. Inside, the space was completely empty. Not ransacked, not vandalized. Surgically emptied. Every piece of equipment gone. Every cable removed. The walls still had the mounting brackets where his monitors had been, but everything else had been extracted with professional precision. The landlord claimed the lease had ended weeks ago. When I showed him Marcus's business card, he frowned. That unit's been vacant since 2019. Nobody's rented it. I checked my phone. The text messages between us were still there. The calendar entries, the receipts from the cafe where we'd met. But Marcus himself had been erased from official existence. No social media profiles. No business registration. No digital footprint. As if he'd never existed at all. That's when the real fear set in. Not the fear of the unknown I'd felt in Antarctica, but something worse. The fear of being systematically silenced by people who knew exactly what they were doing. I drove home, hands locked on the wheel, checking my mirrors every 30 seconds. When I reached my apartment, I found a business card tucked under my windshield wiper. No name, no company. Just coordinates, 77, 5200 degree S, 1 6667 degree W. The same location as before, but shifted 3 decimal places. 23 miles southeast, as if something had moved, or was waiting. Inside my apartment, I pulled every curtain closed and started going through my father's materials again. That's when I found the second envelope, hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of Moby Dick on his bookshelf. Inside was a sketch on yellowing graph paper, a landmass that didn't appear on any modern Antarctic map. Jagged cliffs surrounding a central depression labeled Event Zone. In the margin, one word in block letters, Prohibited. There was also a list of names. Most were crossed out. One matched a man I vaguely remembered from childhood. Thomas Garrett, who used to visit my father once a year, always at night, never staying long. I found his obituary. Died in 1978, Cause of death, exposure. But it happened in Tucson, Arizona, in July, during a heat wave. The next morning, my email account was wiped. Everything. Contacts, archives, backup drives connected to the cloud. All gone. In the trash folder, a single text file. Stop. I noticed my router was still blinking even after I unplugged the modem. Someone was accessing my network remotely. Had been for days, maybe weeks. Every search I'd made, every document I'd opened, every person I'd contacted, they'd been watching all of it. I went off-grid immediately. Paid cash for a motel 2 hours away, used a burner phone, left my laptop and all my devices behind. Took only the physical evidence, the letter, the tapes, the sketches. If they wanted to stop me, they'd have to do it in person. They did. 2 men in plain clothes intercepted me in my motel room at 3 a.m. No badges, no identification. One had a small scar beneath his left ear, like something had been implanted and removed. The other stood by the door, arms crossed, watching everything with the detachment of someone who'd done this many times before. "We need you to stop looking," the first man said. His voice was level, almost kind. "This isn't a request. Who do you work for?" I asked. "That's not your concern." He placed a photograph on the table, infrared, time-stamped 3 days earlier. It showed me standing in front of the ice ridge where I'd found the engraved panel. But in the corner of the frame was something else. A shape, tall and narrow, barely visible against the snow. Like heat haze carved into a humanoid silhouette. "We've been trying to contain this since 1947, he said. "Your father understood the stakes. He kept quiet for 40 years. You're about to undo all of that because you think you deserve to know the truth." "What is it?" I demanded. "What did they find?" He stood up, sliding the photograph across the table toward me. "Something that should have stayed buried. Something that's been waiting a very long time for someone to notice it again. Every time someone digs into this, every time someone asks questions, it gets stronger. You think you're investigating a mystery? You're actually ringing a dinner bell." They left without another word. When I looked outside, my rental car was gone. I was stranded in a motel in the middle of nowhere, holding evidence of something I barely understood and couldn't prove. But I wasn't going to stop. Not after everything I'd seen. I spent 3 weeks moving from place to place, following leads that seemed to evaporate the moment I got close. But I eventually found someone willing to talk. A Norwegian researcher named Dr. Erik Hansen, who'd been monitoring ionospheric disturbances over Antarctica. No government ties, no corporate funding. Just a scientist following anomalies that mainstream institutions refused to acknowledge. "Look at this," he said, showing me readings from his monitoring station. "These spikes started in late February, centered exactly on your coordinates. No natural phenomenon explains this pattern. But here's what's truly disturbing. The spikes reset every few days, like a pulse, like something breathing." He pulled up a waveform analysis. The pattern was identical to the lattice Marcus had found in the audio recording. The same geometric structures, the same impossible precision. "This isn't weather," Dr. Hansen said quietly. "It's a transmission, and it's getting stronger." His lab was broken into that night. Equipment destroyed, files stolen. I found him outside, bleeding from a head wound, staring at nothing. "They don't care if you're harmless," he whispered. "They care if you notice." I disappeared again, but this time I had a plan. I joined a private expedition, one of the new tourism ventures taking wealthy thrill-seekers to Antarctica. I paid triple to be dropped near Mount Sidley, an extinct volcanic caldera near my coordinates. The pilot didn't ask questions. Nobody does when you pay enough. The caldera was enormous, a wound in the ice over a mile wide. I climbed down the western edge and found something that made my blood stop. A perfect circle etched into the rock face, 50 feet across, with grooves spiraling inward. At the center was a hollow indentation. Empty, but clearly designed to hold something. My father's letter flashed through my mind. The term he'd used, interface point. I hadn't understood it then. Now I did. This wasn't a natural formation. It was a socket, a connection point for something that had been removed or was waiting to be inserted. My satellite phone vibrated even though I hadn't turned it on. The screen glowed with a single word: return. Then it went dead. So did my watch. The vibration from beneath the ice intensified, a moan rising from deep within the volcanic chambers. Not mechanical, not human, something else entirely. Behind me, a whisper. My name. I spun around. Nothing there. Just ice and silence and the echo of my name hanging in the air like breath I hadn't taken. I climbed out, triggered my emergency beacon and got extracted. But the damage was done. I'd gone too far, seen too much, and whatever was down there knew I'd been close. When I got back to the States, I found one final piece of the puzzle. A backup drive Marcus had secretly made, hidden in my father's belongings. Inside was a video file labeled Threshold. The footage showed a man in navy dress blues standing in front of a steel vault door. Behind him, a wall chart with the familiar Antarctic coordinates. He looked directly into the camera and said, "This is Recorder 8, final log, February 28, 1947. The structure is not responding to any of our attempts at contact. We've tried everything. The commander believes we're standing on a mechanism, not a structure, something buried. Something waiting." He leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "If they activate it, it won't be the beginning of discovery. It'll be the end of denial." The video ended. I understood then what my father had tried to tell me. Operation High Jump didn't find an alien artifact or a Nazi base. They found something older. A door. Or maybe a warning. Something built by hands that weren't human, in a time before humans existed. And in their arrogance, they'd tried to open it. My father spent 40 years trying to keep that door closed. Keeping silent. Keeping the secret. But secrets like this don't die with the people who carry them. They wait. They adapt. They find new ways to be discovered. I've sealed everything now. The letters, the tapes, the recordings, the sketches. Buried them where they can't be found easily. Maybe I've bought us time. Maybe I've only delayed the inevitable. Because here's what I know. Whatever is beneath that ice, it's still there. Still waiting. Still listening. And every person who goes looking for it, every question asked, every piece of evidence uncovered, it all makes the signal stronger. My father's last words to me weren't in his letter. They were in what he didn't say. In 40 years of silence. In a secret he carried to his grave. Some doors should never be opened. But I'm afraid we opened this one a long time ago, and now something is finally ready to come through.